The Democrats want Americans to believe that the Supreme Court at any moment, in fact, the chairman just referenced this, at any moment could step in and overturn its opinions in Obergefell and Loving. It's just not true. The Supreme Court is not poised to overturn its opinions in either of those decisions. Just look at what the court has said. The Dobbs opinion does not undermine other substantive due process rights in any way, close quote. Just in case anyone is not clear on the meaning of does not undermine them in any way, the court later reiterated that the Dobbs decision should not be misunderstood or mischaracterized to cast doubt on precedents that do not concern abortion. The court condemned the alarmist idea that the Dobbs decision would lead to the overturning of other cases as perhaps designed to stoke unfounded fears that our decision will impair those other rights. It is that unfounded fear that brings us here today. Democrats have conjured up this non-existent based on one line in Justice Thomas's concurrence in Dobbs, and they are misunderstanding or deliberately misrepresenting what Justice Thomas wrote. Justice Thomas made the same point that he has made for years, that the collection of rights secured by the doctrine of substantive due process is better understood as being a function of the Constitution's privileges and immunities clause. That's it. From his statement that a body of law should flow from one place in the Constitution instead of another comes the hyperbolic arguments that we have heard about the necessity of this bill. After the House last considered this bill in July, the Senate was forced to make significant changes to the bill. Unfortunately, those changes do not go far enough in protecting religious liberty. For example, the Senate amendment does not protect the right a private entity that is determined to be a state actor as a result of the services they provide on behalf of a government. These entities could be adoption agencies, shelters, or other service providers operated by a religious organization under contract with a city or state. Across the country, people of faith serve their neighbors and their communities through these charitable efforts. But this bill could force them to abandon their faith or abandon the service. That is an unacceptable outcome in the United States. For years, the Democrats have been playing a dangerous game with the court. They want Americans to believe that the court lacks transparency and struggles with its ethics. Simply not true. This bill is simply the latest installment of the Democrats' campaign to intimidate the highest court in our land. They've engaged in a smear campaign against sitting justices and nominees. Democrats have stood on the steps of the court and threatened justices by name for not ruling the way they want in high-profile cases. Democrat members of the Judiciary Committee, including the chairman, have introduced a bill to pack the court, to add 4 justices to our highest court. Not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4, because they simply want to take it over. And Democrats have held hearings to showcase fringe legal and conspiracy theories about the court and its rulings. In fact, later today, the Judiciary Committee will hold a hearing to again suggest that the court has somehow been compromised based on a totally unsubstantiated allegation that Justice Alito leaked information 8 years ago about an opinion in the Hobby Lobby case. There's just one problem. Justice Alito denies its allegation. The individual who allegedly was the conduit for the leak denies it ever happened. And even the media admits there are holes in this story. Politico said this, quote, "We spent several months attempting to corroborate the allegation, but were unable to locate anyone who heard about the decision directly from Alito or his wife before the release of the case." The New York Times reported that there are, quote, gaps in the allegation. New York Times, the one who broke the story. They reported there are gaps in this allegation about a leak from Justice Alito 8 years ago. Gaps in an allegation. You know what that is? That is liberal speak for that story doesn't add up. But the Democrats are determined to not let the truth get in the way of their story and their intimidation tactics on the court. This is not the way we're supposed to operate. I hope that we can vote this bill down. I hope it does not pass because I think it is dangerous and takes the country in the wrong direction. With that, I reserve the balance of our time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your leadership. I rise today in strong support for the Respect of Marriage Act, an historic step forward in Democrats' fight to defend the dignity and equality of every American. Let us salute those who have legislated and advocated relentlessly to make this bill the law of the land. Thank you, Mr. Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, Equality Caucus Chair David Cicilline, and all of the members of the Equality Caucus, and the grassroots activists out there, without whose mobilization so many pieces of legislation to expand freedom in our country would not be possible. I say that because when I came to this floor 35 years ago, my first speech on the floor after I was sworn in was to talk about, say that I came here to fight HIV and AIDS. What I learned after that is that we had to fight against discrimination against people with HIV and AIDS. Two people who were so significant in that are Phyllis and Del Martin and Phyllis Lyons, champions in our country. Well, I'll talk about that in a moment. First, I want to salute the Senate for its strong bipartisan legislation under leadership of Chuck Schumer and Senator Tammy Baldwin, and the bipartisan strong support that this House gave the legislation to send it over to the Senate. Marriage equality has been a law across our country since 2015, and proudly even longer in the state of California. Indeed, my thoughts today are with Phyllis Lyon and Del Martin, two dear friends and iconic trailblazers. I've brought their picture to the floor time and time again to talk about freedom and dignity and respect so many times. Nearly 2 decades ago, their enduring love made history as they joyfully said their vows in San Francisco City Hall, the first. In the years since, the same euphoria has blessed couples and bonded families in every corner of America. And yet, since the Supreme Court's monstrous decision overturning Roe v. Wade, right-wing forces have set their sights on this basic personal freedom. In his concurring opinion, Clarence Thomas explicitly called on the court to reconsider its ruling in Obergefell. While his legal reasoning is twisted and unsound, we must take Justice Thomas at his word and the hateful movement behind him at their word. We must act now on a bipartisan, bicameral basis to combat bigoted extremism and uphold the inviolability of same-sex and interracial marriages. Once signed into law, the Respect for Marriage Act will help prevent right-wing extremists from upending the lives of loving couples, traumatizing kids across the country, and turning back the clock on hard-won progress. This legislation takes several steps to uphold marriage equality under federal law. First, it tears the bigoted, unconstitutional Defense of Marriage Act off the books for good. When that bill was passed, our colleagues understood that it was not constitutional. Why else would they have tried to strip the judicial review of Defense of Marriage Act if they thought it could take the test of judicial review? Today's vote will codify a legal reality already handed down by the Supreme Court and ensure DOMA can never again be used to justify hateful discrimination. Second, the Respect for Marriage Act will enshrine married couples' right to equal protection under federal law, from tax filings to Social Security to bereavement and veterans' benefits. Third, this legislation will require that every state recognizes all valid out-of-state marriages, regardless of any heinous restrictions imposed by particular state law. This legislation is the latest step in House Democrats' fight to win full equality for LGBTQ Americans and forge a more perfect union that our children and their children, all of our children deserve. Fighting alongside tireless advocates, we transformed the fight against HIV/AIDS here at home and around the world. And I thank President Bush for his leadership in that regard as well. And all of our presidents, well, up until a certain point. We tossed don't ask, don't tell into the dustbin of history. We enacted fully inclusive federal hate crimes legislation, including Americans from the scourge of bigoted violence with the Matthew Shepard Act. And Our friend Barney Frank, our former colleague, as he was so instrumental in passing that legislation. And today, we will include marriage equality into federal law now and for generations to come. I'm just going to speak personally for a moment because, as I mentioned earlier, my first words on the floor of this House were about fighting against HIV and AIDS and the discrimination that goes with that. My final bill as Speaker the first time, one of the final bills that I signed was the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And now one of the final bills that I will sign in the enrollment will be this beautiful legislation, the Respect for Marriage Act that we are passing today. Today, we stand up for the values the vast majority of Americans hold dear, a belief in the dignity, beauty, and divinity, spark of divinity in every person, an abiding respect for love so powerful that it binds two people together. San Francisco's, when we talk about freedom, I think of Harvey Milk. He once told his supporters, "I have tasted freedom. I will not give up that which I have tasted." Yes, today this chamber proudly stands with forces of freedom, not going back, and justice. Mr. Speaker, I urge a resounding bipartisan aye vote in favor of the Respect for Marriage Act in loving memory of Del Martin and Phyllis Lyons, my dear friends and iconic pioneers, and urge a strong bipartisan vote. I yield back. Thank you.